The English word art is abstract, incorporating a plethora of media such as literature, dance, sculpture, and music, to name a few. The Cherokee language has no word for art with the same all-encompassing meaning. The artist is a part of the work they do, and the finalized work contains a part of the artist. Cherokee art and the Cherokee artist are integrated and interconnected. In her dissertation on shaping Cherokee art, Jolene Scott states that when commenting on a well-made piece, a Cherokee language speaker may say something along the line of "Agat Osani," very ingenious or smart work, or "Samudi," smart or sharp, and this would be taken as a compliment for the artist who is connected to the piece. Scott says that the speaker is acknowledging the effort and process behind what was created, ultimately praising the creator because the object is imbued with the creator's feelings. The Cherokee have opted for the word ditlilostote as the word for art, as this word contains an understanding of manipulating an object. One of those art forms is pottery. Utilitarian art forms, such as basket weaving or pottery, operate within native cultures as both functional and sacred objects, a holistic concatenation of function, beauty, and spirituality. The history of Cherokee pottery is not something that can be taught in a day. It takes time to grasp how the clay is harvested, processed, formed, decorated, and baked. In the same way, it takes time to recognize the culture that has produced this art for centuries. Native American pottery is hand-built with the coiling method, and each completed object has a small piece of the artist built into it. Let's look into the history and future of coiled Cherokee pottery. Archaeological sites across the southeast part of North America have produced a large number of artifacts that give us examples of pre- and post-contact Cherokee pottery. Pottery provides archaeologists with possible ideas of the traditions and the lifeways where only oral history exists. When found in situ, pottery and shards give clues to the people who lived in an area and how they lived. A fine example is a cooking pit excavated in the mid-1950s that has since been inundated by the Buford, Georgia Dam across the upper Chattahoochee River. This pit presented a nearly solid layer of sherds and non-domestic animal bones. However, the appearance of European metal artifacts places the find at about the time of contact. The Peach State Archaeological website encourages academic reporting on archaeological sites and has a great number of descriptions and photos of the various types of historic and prehistoric pottery in the Southeast. Cherokee pottery shares a distinction with Iroquoian pottery in that they have unique stamping that is not only decorative, but an important feature that makes the pot easier to hold. And it disperses heat more evenly in the cooking process. These pots differ from the pottery of surrounding southeastern tribes due to this ornamental stamping, as well as by the black, glossy color applied to particular pieces through a process called smother firing. In 1888, ethnographer James Mooney observed the use of the stamping tool, a paddle-shaped implement with a design carved into the end, with which the artist swatted the wet clay of the vessel repeatedly. In the Old World, ancient Summer is the site of the first wheel, and it is in fact a potter's wheel. However, the potter's wheel was never used anywhere in either North or South America. Instead, Native American pots are hand-built using the coil method. Beginning with a flat bottom, long, thinly rolled coils of clay are set on the base and then smudged together to form a whole vessel. At some point in the creation process, the pot is stamped, the walls and lip are shaped, and they are put into the desired form, and the pot is set to dry. Many early Cherokee pots were decorated by pressing fabric into the clay while it was still wet, leaving a textured surface. Today, historians have a better picture of the various textile weaves used in cloth and basketry because of this. Clay is harvested from the areas next to streams and rivers, and then processed through a series of soaking in water and then sifting, allowing it to dry to the desired consistency. Then this wet or plastic clay can be worked immediately, or it can be allowed to dry completely and then ground into a powder and reliquefied and worked later. Once the clay is molded, it is dried into the sun until it is leather hard. In the early part of this phase, the clay can still be manipulated a bit without damage. Many Cherokee artists will burnish or polish the clay in this phase with a very smooth rock. In the latter part of this stage, the clay is no longer pliable, but texture can still be added by using a sharp stick or a knife to carve designs into it. Finally, the clay will become bone hard, no longer cool to the touch, and ready to be fired. Historically, there are a variety of ways the clay can be fired, and each of the different ways produce varying colors and textures in the clay. The clay pot may be heated next to a fire for a few hours, or it may be put directly into a small fire for a time to heat it, in preparation for a much hotter treatment that follows. The heat of firing can shatter a vessel, and to avoid this, different elements are added to the wet clay to temper it. Some potters will use ground up fired shards. Others may use sand or some type of grit. Sometimes an artist would fire the inside of a pot with burning corn cobs to produce a black or glistening surface that is specific to Cherokee pottery. Dr. Carl Dentzel states that there is evidence that points to fabrication and use of clay for ceramic artifacts dating as far back as 30,000 BC in North America. Some early pottery lacked any design elements. However, archaeologists have found across both the Northeast and the Northwest clay lamps formed with animal features, as well as small effigies of animals and humans made from fired clay. Yet, the most widespread use of pottery occurred after the development of agriculture. The southeastern woodlands hunter-gatherer people of prehistory had a wide variety of plant food sources such as wild grass, wild rice, flower seeds, hickory nuts, acorns, wild onions, poke, and berries. Some native plants such as edible gourds and sunflowers and sumpweed all show signs of domestication long before the introduction of maize from Mesoamerica. However, sometime between AD 1000 to 1300, beans and maize, or corn, became a dominant food source, so much so that hunting became less important than agriculture. This shift was only possible because of improved techniques for making pottery. The Cherokee, like other woodland people, began to grow, store, and process corn, and this was made possible by the increased production of pottery. Water and storage containers were formed with indented bases so that they could be carried comfortably and set upright on a floor. Cooking pots were made with a conical base and were burrowed down into the coals of a fire, propped up with hot rocks so as to distribute the heat through the entire container. Before pottery, food was cooked by roasting over a fire or in leather bags filled with liquid that boiled when heated rocks were added. The shape of clay pots was much more efficient for heating and cooking food. Archaeologists have also found some flat vessel fragments that showed repeated heating and bands of soot. These are understood to be baking platters or griddles for foodstuffs such as cornbread. A historical description of the process states that the griddle was heated, the bread was put on it. A dome-shaped ceramic pot was put over it, a bit like this modern one, and coals were heaped over it. The bread baked in this was said to be baked to as great a perfection as in any European oven. Food preparation among the Cherokee is considered by many as an art in and of itself. One of the traditional foods made from corn is hominy. Making it requires a process of boiling the dried dent corn in a solution of lye made from wood ash. Another food made with lye is a type of bread made from ground cornmeal. The lye was used as a leavening agent. Lye, or metal hydroxide, is a strong alkali soluble in water and is the main ingredient in caustic solutions. It is very corrosive to both metal and glass, making pottery the best solution for storing and preparing food made with it. The ability to store foodstuffs such as corn and lye in pottery and boil the food into soup in crockery placed in a fire, as well as serve it on pottery dishes, demonstrates how integral pottery was in everyday life. Colonization had a negative impact on the woman's craft of pottery making. First, the introduction of European diseases interrupted the continuation of knowledge passed from mother to daughter. But ultimately, the introduction of metal pots replacing pottery came close to making the craft so arcane as to become obsolete. In 1888, a gentleman named James Mooney was sent by the Bureau of American Ethnology to study the pottery methods of the eastern Cherokees. Mooney found 3 older women who still made pottery in the old way. One of these women's names was Catalsta. Mooney's detailed notes were used by W. H. Holmes in his description of the methods used to produce Cherokee pottery and the ways in which it differed from their neighboring pottery. This pottery is referred to now as Qualla ceramic style pottery. Anna Bell Sixkiller Mitchell of the Western Cherokee tribe grew up in Jay, Oklahoma. When her husband asked her to make him a replica of Sequoia's pipe, it began a lifelong journey into the history and art of Cherokee pottery. Anna was responsible for reviving the southeastern pottery tradition and was adept at passing on her knowledge, teaching pottery in Tahlequah in the Sequoia School District, and as the Johnson O'Malley Program Director in Veneta Schools. In 1988, she was the first woman designated as a Cherokee National Treasure, and in 2008, she was presented with the Educator of Arts and Humanities Lifetime Achievement Award. Through careful study of Mooney's notes, as well as through the archaeological examples of Qualla pottery spanning 400 years, a new generation of Cherokee potters has been able to glean the knowledge of styles and techniques of their ancestors and breathe new life in this ancient Cherokee tradition. A 2-day workshop on pottery at the Museum of the Cherokee Indian birthed the Cherokee Potters Guild in 2002. Their mission is to revive the stamped pottery tradition, teach it to others, promote the pottery, set prices, and do research. Artists such as Jane Ostie, Amanda Swimmer, and Joel Queen lead the way in restoring the art of Cherokee pottery, as well as developing their own interpretations of the Qualla tradition. The Cherokee legend of the first woman to make pottery says she created it after watching a wasp make his mud house that was unhurt by fire and water. In our modern day, Cherokee potters have demonstrated their creative adaptability. No one should underestimate the recurring cycles of tradition and the stubborn resilience of the Cherokee culture. Beginning with creating and selling a mix of Cherokee and Catawba pottery, and embracing other Native American styles, such as the wedding vase or effigy oil lamps found at Moundville, as well as exploring the various techniques of other nationalities. The 20th century has demonstrated that ethnographers of the 19th century were wrong about the eventual demise of the old ways. Just as Cherokee potters coil their pottery, Cherokee people have reclaimed and recoiled their past into an elegant and exciting future.